Israel has openly intervened in Syria for the second time this year. This according to U.S. officials. They say Tel Aviv has carried out another bombing run on a target inside Syria. This following a previous strike that goes back to January. Now, it's not immediately clear what exactly was targeted in this latest attack. Some officials say it was an arms shipment on its way to Hezbollah in Lebanon. Others claim, though, it was a Syrian warehouse. So far, though, neither Israel nor Damascus have confirmed the reports. But Tel Aviv has said in the past it would do everything possible to stop the Syrian government from handing weapons over to Hezbollah. Back in January, Israel bombed a convoy on the Syrian-Lebanese border. Do stay with RT for the latest on this breaking news story. In fact, let's get some reaction now on this story here on RT. And join from California, Con Hallinan, a contributing editor for the U.S. think tank Foreign Policy in Focus. Good to see you today. Thanks for joining us on this Saturday. After the last Israeli airstrike in January, Damascus did say that it reserves the right to defend itself, but it never did. How do you expect the Syrian government to react now?
I don't expect the Syrian government to do anything specific. I don't expect them to respond to this. I think that if they did, it would create the possibility of a much more massive Israeli attack. I think the idea that the Syrian government would be shipping arms to Hezbollah in the midst of a civil war to be a very dubious kind of project. I don't see what the logic of that is. I think the Israelis are intervening at this point, and the U.S. is thinking of intervening because I don't think things are going exactly the way that the insurgency wants them to go.
Well, so, I mean, certainly Washington in recent weeks and recent months has been treading very, very carefully around the ongoing Syrian conflict, or where it was at one point very much supporting the idea of getting rid of Assad. And now, perhaps, as you suggest, maybe they are treading very carefully around it. But when it comes to possibly unconfirmed at this point, but the Israeli airstrike now in Syria, the second time since January, what can the embattled Syrian government do to defend itself from Israeli airstrikes?
I don't really think that there's very much they can do to defend themselves in the Israelis. I mean, the Israelis can pretty much strike as they will in Syria. What the effect of that is on the wider Arab world, I think, is the key question here. And the Israelis may find that while they're able to basically strike at will against Syria, that also means that it places a very different view, so to speak, of the civil war in Syria. And I think at this point the Syrians are not going to do anything physically, but I think they are going to say politically that the Israelis are attempting to overthrow the Assad government, and therefore anybody who supports the overthrow of the Assad government is in alignment with Tel Aviv. And that may be a pretty hard sell for Israel.
But Mr. Hallinan, just a few moments ago, as you did say, the U.S., I should say, you were suggesting that the U.S. is showing more support, indeed, in recent days for the ousting of President Assad. The U.S., in fact, in the past 48 hours, Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel saying that America is open to considering arming the rebels. What do Washington and its allies in Tel Aviv ultimately want to see happen in Syria? We understand they want to see Assad go, but how far are they prepared to go to that end?
It's a little hard to say at this point. I would say that they sort of have doubled down in terms of the bet. And I think what they're feeling is that the civil war is at a stalemate. They don't see the Syrian army breaking apart. They don't see that there's a kind of a massive opposition to Assad within his own supporters. And I think what they're trying to do is to double the bet, to essentially raise the ante at this point. Is it going to work? It's very hard to say. I think that the Syrians can't do much in response to it, but I'm not sure that the Israeli attack and the U.S. step-up of support for the insurgency necessarily plays that well in the rest of the Arab world outside of the Gulf countries, or at least...
Well, we certainly are seeing a growing amount of desire for intervention, whether it comes from Western powers or even from regional powers, the immediate neighbors surrounding Syria. Con Hallinan, live from Berkeley, California, a contributing editor for the U.S. think tank Foreign Policy in Focus. A pleasure to have you on RT today. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, now let's get the latest from our RT's Middle East correspondent, Paula Sleer, now joining us live here to bring us up to date on this developing breaking news here on RT this Saturday morning. Hello, Paula. Details that we know of this suspected second Israeli strike in Syria since January. What are the Israeli officials saying now?
Well, as of yet, there's been no official comment from the Israeli side, but Israel in the past has said that it will do everything necessary to stop the transfer of weapons from Syria to Hezbollah or other so-called terrorist groups. Now, the US officials are reporting that Israel conducted an airstrike into Syria. What's not yet clear is what and where the target of this attack was. There are some reports that say it was a chemical weapons warehouse, whereas others are reporting that it was an arms convoy on its way to Lebanon. What's also unclear at this stage is whether or not Israeli planes actually entered Syrian airspace to conduct the attack, or whether they launched missiles from the Israeli side. It's also not clear whether or not the Israelis alerted the Americans before they carried out such an attack, and White House officials have referred all questions to the Israeli regime, which, as I say, at this stage is keeping mum on the topic. This is, as you say, the second time this year that Israel conducted airstrikes into Syria. Back in January, Israeli fighter jets attacked a convoy of sophisticated anti-aircraft missiles that were believed to be on their way to Hezbollah. The Syrian government is allied with Lebanon's Hezbollah, and Israel has said repeatedly in the past that it is committed to making sure Syria doesn't supply any game-changing weapons to Hezbollah. So essentially, you have a situation where Israeli warplanes violate Lebanese airspace on a regular basis, and Hezbollah recently going on record saying that it had intervened in the Syrian conflict to help its allies in Damascus. As far as the chemical weapons issue goes, Syria recently said, and this was after the US claimed that it had intelligence pointing to the recent use of chemical weapons by Damascus. The Damascus regime said that it doesn't have any kind of chemical weapons and would never use them on the home front, if indeed it did have them. Following that, the first Israeli airstrike happened in January, and Syria then said it reserved the right to defend itself, but there was no open retaliation. There has been tension building up between Syria and Israel for quite some time, and particularly recently, the two countries share a border, and that is the disputed Golan Heights, which is Syrian territory that is essentially occupied by Israel. And we've seen there recently clashes as well as exchanges of mortar fire in the past few months. So certainly an incredibly tense situation on the ground, but as of yet, no word from the Israelis as to whether or not they participated or carried out the strike.
All right, the latest on this breaking news here on RT, that of RT's Paula Sleer there, and Israel's suspected second strike this year inside Syria. Thank you.